Sometimes the most dangerous moment in a violent relationship is the moment when you realize that you have an opportunity to do something. Yeah, I know this is a movie clip, but it documents the real life turmoil that happened behind closed doors in the reality of Tina and Ike Turner's relationship. Tina recognized her moment when it came, that golden opportunity to make her move. And what did she do? She left. She didn't just walk away, she ran. When people do the most, I do the analysis. Let's go. I want you to keep that scene in the back of your mind because there is another woman whose story raises a different question, but it's a very similar situation. What happens when the person you're afraid of is no longer actively attacking you, but you decide to attack them anyway? That's one of the questions that a jury will have to wrestle with when Keshia Golden goes to trial for the 2022 killing of her live-in boyfriend, Calvin Sidney. Now, I'm not judging Keshia Golden. I wasn't there. I wish I knew what she was thinking in those final moments, but I don't know. And I also don't know what it felt like to live inside that relationship. Based on the allegations surrounding this case, there's a moment that I believe we should look at a lot more closely because prosecutors are saying that this wasn't simply a woman trying to escape an attack. They're saying that Keshia Golden eventually went into the bedroom armed with a knife and fatally stabbed Calvin Sidney. And that distinction right there will become extremely important at trial. For those unfamiliar with the backstory, let's go over some of the documented details leading up to the death and first-degree murder charge in this case. According to court documents and reports surrounding the case, Keshia Golden, 33 years old at the time, was 8 months pregnant and living with her boyfriend, 30-year-old Calvin Sidney. They lived together in Chicago when an argument between the couple escalated into a fatal stabbing. The incident started during an argument over who would use the microwave first to reheat their food. According to the documented account, Keshia Golden knocked a plate of food out of Calvin Sidney's hand, and Calvin responded by shoving Keshia onto the kitchen counter. Calvin's uncle did intervene and he was able to separate the couple, but then Calvin left the kitchen and went into the bedroom to lay down. Several family members, including Keshia Golden's father, were all present in the home while all this chaos was unfolding. Calvin Sidney's uncle was there, his brother was there, and his brother's girlfriend, they were all there too. But according to court documents, Keshia Golden continued approaching the bedroom and attempting to argue with Calvin. And moments later, Keshia armed herself with a knife and then she entered the bedroom. Calvin's uncle said that he tried to prevent Keshia from even getting close to Calvin. But court records state that Keshia Golden managed to reach around the uncle and then she stabbed Calvin once high up in the thigh. At the time of the stabbing, Calvin Sidney was unarmed. The knife would enter his femur and struck his femoral artery, causing severe blood loss. Y'all do know that the femur has several arteries around it, right? According to reports, Keshia Golden dropped the knife and she left the scene. She later returned, though, while police were still investigating the bedroom/crime scene. No pun intended. After being read her Miranda rights, Keshia Golden waived those rights and she spoke to investigators anyway. And according to the police, she admitted that she entered the bedroom and then stabbed Calvin Sidney following the argument that took place in the kitchen. Officers recovered a knife from the kitchen counter that appeared to have blood on it. Calvin Sidney was transported to a nearby hospital where he ended up dying from his injuries. An autopsy was conducted and it determined that Calvin Sidney's cause of death was a single stab wound to the thigh. But here's something else that I'm sure is going to get highlighted at the trial. The case also included documented reports of prior domestic incidents involving this couple. Although Keshia Golden herself had no prior criminal history, there are 5 domestic violence reports that were made between June and September of 2022 involving this couple. According to those reports, Calvin Sidney was identified as the aggressor in 4 of those incidents, involving allegations of choking, slapping, pushing, and punching Keshia Golden. In one incident which took place, though, on August the 29th, Keshia Golden reportedly stabbed Calvin Sidney in the neck. He was hospitalized, but he declined to pursue any charges against his girlfriend, Keshia. Keshia Golden was later arrested and charged with first-degree murder in connection with Calvin Sidney's death. These documented events, they form an important part of the factual background surrounding this case. While the legal question of whether Keshia Golden's actions in October of 22 constituted self-defense, well, that remains a matter for the courts to determine. Keshia Golden has maintained that she was acting in self-defense during that fatal moment. Her attorneys have argued that Calvin Sidney had been abusive and that Keshia was defending herself. And the fact that Keshia was 8 months pregnant at the time, that's an important piece of this story that we just can't simply overlook. That one fact makes the circumstances surrounding the confrontation that more complicated, especially where emotions are concerned. Because if someone is physically attacking an 8 month pregnant woman, the instinct for her is going to be to protect herself and that unborn child. And that's completely understandable. But in the legal sense, self defense is about what was happening at the exact moment that deadly force was used. Whether someone has ever been violent toward you in the past, well, that speaks more to your state of mind and why you might believe that your attacker will probably end up ending your life. That's something, though, that the jury will have to focus on in this case. Now, contrary to the belief of Keshia Golden's supporters, this is not an open and shut case of self defense. It gets far more complicated than that, and let me tell you why. Prosecutors have alleged that Calvin Sidney eventually went into the bedroom and lay down on the bed. Now, I heard there's 2 things that a man shouldn't do after jumping on a woman. Number 1 is eat her food, and number 2 is go lay down. But I digress. Keshia Golden allegedly followed Calvin Sidney into that bedroom carrying a knife, and then she stabbed him. That moment in time, if you will, raises a very difficult question that the jury's going to have to answer. Was Keshia Golden still defending herself from an imminent attack, or had the situation changed? Because those are 2 very different scenarios. I mean, just imagine 2 people fighting, okay? One person is actively attacking the other. The victim grabs a weapon and uses deadly force to stop the attack. Okay, that's one situation. Now imagine that the attacker stops, that they go into another room and they decide to go lay down on the bed. The other person then follows them with a weapon and then uses deadly force. The jury's going to look at those circumstances and ask, was the threat still imminent? And that question could be at the heart of this entire trial. Because by definition alone, imminent means something that's about to happen or about to occur very soon. And imminent danger means a threat that's right around the corner. But in the legal sense, the sense that Keshia Golden is going to be judged by, her perceived danger had to be immediate, meaning that the danger is about to happen right now, not at some point in the future. Her perceived danger had to be reasonable. Keshia's fear must match what a calm or a rational person would feel under similar stress. The defensive force that Keshia used must match the severity of the threat that she faced at the hands of Calvin Sidney while he was laying down in their shared bedroom. And then there's mistaken belief, where if you honestly and reasonably believe that you face danger, like let's say mistaking a phone for a weapon, even if you're wrong, your action could still be justified. Now, this could possibly work in Keshia's favor because Keshia Golden alleges that her boyfriend Calvin attacked her in a previous altercation while she was 18 weeks pregnant at that time, and she later miscarried. This is where conversations about cases like this can start to get real confusing. When you're attempting to explain how someone actually felt after ending a life due to what they believed to be self defense. You can believe that someone was genuinely afraid of another person and still question whether the use of deadly force was legally justified. That's not a contradicting statement, because a history of abuse could help explain why someone was afraid. But the jury still has to examine what was happening when the deadly force was used. And that's why Keshia's defense could face a difficult argument in court. Keshia Golden's defense attorneys are not only asking jurors to believe that Calvin Sidney was an abusive boyfriend, they're asking them to believe that when Keshia used deadly force, she reasonably believed that she needed to do so in order to protect herself. And listen, prosecutors are going to challenge that by pointing to what happened immediately beforehand and by Keshia's own admission. Calvin walked into that bedroom, he went and laid down. So you see, this is why I chose that particular Tina Turner scene at the beginning. In that movie scene, Ike eventually goes to lay down after abusing Tina. And Tina recognized not only her bruised face in the mirror, she recognized an opportunity after the attack, an opportunity to leave, to get out. She runs, but she doesn't go back and attack him. Now, I'm not saying that Keshia Golden should have done exactly what Tina Turner did. Real life is not a movie. And victims of domestic violence don't always respond in ways that we might expect them to. People freeze up. Sometimes they panic. Some fight back and some people run. And sometimes people make decisions in a terrifying moment that are just impossible for people on the outside to fully understand. Keshia Golden made her own decision to use deadly force, and she made her own decision to reject a probation plea deal. Nobody's suggesting that Keshia Golden was a perfect victim, but a jury will be asked to determine whether the killing of Calvin Sidney was justified under the circumstances presented by the evidence. And if the evidence shows that Calvin had stopped attacking, had walked into the bedroom, and was laying on the bed when Keshia entered the bedroom, carrying a knife, I can absolutely see why some jurors might have questions. Prosecutors offered Keshia Golden a plea agreement that would have reduced the case down to second-degree murder with 2 years of probation being served only, no incarceration. Her attorneys rejected that deal on Keshia's behalf. And that's why this case is headed to trial. Can Keshia Golden's attorneys convince a jury that this was justified self-defense beyond what prosecutors are going to argue was an intentional killing? The defense doesn't necessarily have to convince jurors that Keshia's life was perfect. Well, we know it was far from it. But they do have to convince jurors that the evidence supports Keshia's claim of self-defense under the law. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the prosecution is going to focus on the moments immediately surrounding the stabbing. Despite there being evidence of prior domestic violence incidents and eyewitnesses to the last incident, we know that the evidence paints a picture of a toxic and troubled relationship. Right now, Keshia Golden's fate is hinging on her self-defense claim in that tumultuous relationship. But, at the moment that Keshia used deadly force, did she reasonably believe that she was facing an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm? If prosecutors can convince jurors that the immediate threat had ended and that Keshia had an opportunity to leave, and also that she instead chose to enter the bedroom armed with a knife and attack Calvin Sidney, then the juror is really going to have a difficult time accepting self-defense in this case. We don't know what every piece of evidence will show yet, but we're about to hear the evidence from both sides. We're going to hear the defense explain what Keshia says happened, and we're going to hear the prosecution explain why they believe it wasn't justified self-defense. But at the end of the day, 12 jurors will have to decide what happened in those final moments. So before you decide whether Keshia Golden is a victim or a murderer, I want you to watch the evidence. Because sometimes the most important part of a case isn't what happened at the beginning of the fight. It's what happened in the final moments. The moments when everything changed. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who can use this message. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and leave a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. Do you believe Keshia Golden's pregnancy status will be a major factor in the jury's decision? Or do you believe that her actions describe something other than self-defense? Meet me in the comments. We can continue the conversation there.